Welcome to Soldering Basics. This video is for ages 10 and up, and adult supervision is recommended. Today we're going to learn the maker skill of soldering, which is useful for repairing wires as well as working on circuit boards. But what is soldering? It is the process of joining pieces together using soft melted metal, usually with the intent to carry an electric current. Unlike welding, where two or more pieces of metal are melted together, soldering does not melt the pieces, just the solder. A solder joint is not as strong as a weld. It is strong, but it is also reversible, so parts can be repaired, replaced, or upgraded. Today's project will focus on repairing wires, so let's get started. Safety first! Wear eye protection because hot solder can pop and splash, possibly causing eye injury. Solder and the soldering iron are extremely hot. The tip and metal parts of the soldering iron can reach over 700 degrees Fahrenheit, causing serious burns or can cause a fire. Make sure your work table can handle heat. Solder rosin, the chemical that helps molten metal flow, is made from pine, which may affect anyone with a pine allergy or asthma. Be sure to work in a well-ventilated area and use a fan or fume extractor to keep the smoke from blowing into your face and lungs. Some solder has lead, but even if you are using lead-free solder, do not eat or drink while handling solder. And be sure to wash your hands after your project. The tools you'll need to get started include eye protection, a soldering iron with stand and a wet sponge, solder with a rosin core, side wire cutters or wire strippers, a heat gun, and heat shrink tubing. The first step is to make sure your wire has been disconnected from any power source. You can then prepare for soldering by stripping off the outer coating, exposing the wires. Do this for both ends that need to be joined. You can use either side wire cutters or wire strippers. When using the side wire cutters, be sure not to cut through the soft copper wire strands. When using wire strippers, simply match the gauge of the wire and then squeeze and twist until the outer covering is cut through and can be stripped off. Once that's complete, separate the copper strands on one of the wires. Before you separate the wire strands on the second piece of wire, remember to slip a piece of heat shrink tubing over the wire. This is important if the ends of your wire have plugs or are otherwise inaccessible. Make sure your heat shrink tubing's diameter is large enough to fit over your joined wires. An optional tool to add to your soldering kit is a third hand. It helps to hold your pieces together while your own hands are busy with the solder and iron. You can purchase one or make your own. You can now twist the wires together. Ensure the twisted wires are nice and tight. Now you can turn on your soldering iron. A nice simple soldering iron to have is one with adjustable temperature and at least 30 watts. Set the temperature to 350 degrees Celsius, which is a good starting temperature for most projects. After a few minutes, once your iron has heated up, you will need to tin the tip. Tin the soldering iron by touching the solder to the tip of the soldering iron. There should be a small dot of solder on the tip of the iron. Tinning allows for better transfer of heat from the soldering iron to the wire strands. Once your tip has been tinned, place the tip of your soldering iron against the wire strands. Depending on the gauge or thickness of your wire, it may take a few seconds to a few minutes. You can test the wire's temperature by touching the solder to the copper wire. If it melts, it's ready. If the solder doesn't melt, continue to heat the wire strands with your soldering iron. Once the solder starts melting, coat the joined copper wires. Turn your wire as needed until the joined wires have an even coat of solder all around. Give the solder a chance to cool down and harden. You can then remove the joined wire from the third hand and slide the heat shrink tubing over the joint. Set the heat gun on high and pass it over the heat shrink, slowly turning the wire until all the heat shrink has shrunk. Your repair is complete. At the end of every soldering project, make sure to clean and tin your soldering iron tip. Tinning helps to protect the tip from oxidation during storage. If you discover that you like soldering things together, the careers presented here are only a few of the many careers that have soldering listed as a useful skill. Most technicians and engineers working in these fields use equipment that may need repairs and upgrades, or build prototypes that require soldering skills. Thanks for watching, and check out our catalog for more resources.